Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is a presentation by the Coquitlam RCMP. I'd like to welcome Superintendent Claude Wilcott.
Welcome, Superintendent.
Good afternoon. We're starting our budget presentation. We'll go right to the agenda slide. I have with me today my posse here. I have Inspector Smith, Inspector Fellner, Stella Biagioni, she's the Civilian Services and Operations Manager, Danielle Marchand, our Communications Coordinator, and Barb Thornborough, she's our Client Services NCO. Next slide. This is our organizational chart. It gives a snapshot of how the detachment and the staff are organized. RCMP resources are made up of 148 Coquitlam funded members, and that includes 6 integrated service resources. 67 Port Coquitlam funded resources includes 4 integrated service resources and 3 provincial business line resources, for a total of 218 regular members. Municipal resources are 95.4 full-time equivalent. These include all full and part-time positions. Usually we skirt over the previous slide, but I wanted to call your attention to a couple changes that have been made since last time you saw the chart. Crime analysis used to report directly to myself, but is now a direct report to the support officer as part of our new Intel and Analysis unit. The unit was created by replacing existing detachment resources and recalling seconded resources from other areas. The unit is expected to directly support the crime reduction strategy by increasing dedicated crime analysis resources and streamlining the relationship between crime analysis resources and the operational units responsible for the tenets of crime reduction. The second change is the B&E team. It no longer exists. As you know, we did not request any new resources in 2010 because we understood the financial position of the city was in. Ultimately, we had to collapse the B&E team back to the general duty so that we could backfill resources that were redeployed from general duty to the prolific target team and support other strategic and proactive initiatives. Our accomplishments, in previous years we've used this slide to tell you about some innovative initiatives and programs like the crime reduction strategy, business liaison program, bylaw partnerships, asset building, all of which were only possible because of the Council's commitment to our 10-year resource plan. This year's list is a little more modest. Without new resources, we were limited to what we could responsibly take on. But we focused our efforts on supporting our operational objectives. This year we launched the Coquitlam website, created the Intel and Analysis team, and one of the things that I'm very proud of the folks at that attachment was how we manage our resources during the 2010 Olympics, Paralympics, and Urban Domain and G8, G20. We did this with no impact to the community or officer safety issues and no reliance on overtime. So it went extremely well. Now, this is our opportunities and challenge slide. We face a number of challenges right now, one of which is resource flexibility. Flexibility to redeploy resources to address crime series and act on intelligence has been key to the crime reduction strategy success since 2005. New Intel and Analysis unit is beneficial only if police have the resources or the resource flexibility to act on their information. If not, we risk returning to pre-10-year plan era with insufficient resources to do anything other than react to calls for servants and complaints. Another challenge is urbanization, densification, and development. The city naturally wants to attract new residents, visitors, businesses, industries, but at current resource levels, police simply do not have the capacity to handle the additional workload that comes with this type of growth. Third challenge we face is the economic resource capacity due to, or eroding, excuse me, eroding resource capacity due to legislative policy changes, increasing complexity in investigations, Calls related to street-level social issues, which we're all familiar with, homelessness, drug addiction, mental health. These anecdotally worsen with poor economic recovery. Workload related to referrals from regional and integrated units, for example, integrated child exploitation files. These type of files are beyond my control as a manager, and I have to mitigate these risks where possible, but eventually you have to make the tough choices about what falls off the table. And finally, diminishing return on the crime reduction types. Although we've had great success in the past reducing crime with the crime reduction crime types, it started to level off in the last year or so. Prolific and priority offenders are moving into more lucrative crime types, for example, identification theft, mail theft, and fraud. They're more resource intensive, these types of files and investigations. Without resource capacity to do the work, we will lose ground we've gained since the inception of crime reduction in 2005. Some of our opportunities, the intel and analysis team is better. This will better position us than ever to create intelligence. But as mentioned, under challenges, we need flexibility of our resources to respond to these challenges or to these intelligence. Completion and implementation of ICER's police resource model. This is developed quickly over the past few months, but rather than push them to meet our financial plan deadlines, we've decided to extend the time needed to have a better product when it's complete. Superior to measuring only police to population because the model considers populated and non-populated land uses within the city, and sometimes non-residential areas require more police attention than do its residential areas. For example, Coquitlam Centre. The stores attract a lot of customers. And now we're now working on a valid way to include police work and crime data in that model as well. Number 3 is our expansion of our online presence. Communication and relationship building are key to our objectives of reducing fear of crime and enhancing perceptions of safety. With the launch of the website, looking forward to exploring additional online tools for community building and engagement with current resource levels. For example, social networking and Facebook are potential opportunities that we're looking at. This is our operating budget summary. Our 2011 expenditures will be just under $28 million for all police and municipal services. Our 2011 revenues will be just under $5 million. This is a net expenditure of approximately $23 million for 2011. Uh, 2011 police expenditures. Our base budget expenditures for 2011 will be $27,954,500. 73% of this is made up of the police contract and integrated services, 23% by municipal labor costs, and 4% is the operating expenses. And police revenues. Our base budget revenues for 2011 will be just under $5 million. The majority of these revenues are due to Port Coquitlam's share of the labor and facility operating costs, and that's their share, and not their share of the police contract. Provincial traffic fine revenues, fees for service, police and support staff payments, controlled substance bylaw recoveries, provincial grant for victim services, and others. The police reduction slide, our portion of the citywide 2011 budget reduction would be approximately $238,500. And the reduction would be achieved by eliminating 2 regular police member positions. 1 member would be cut from the marijuana enforcement team, 1 member would be cut from the community response team. The impact of this cut would be with our marijuana enforcement team, reducing it from 5 to 4 members. It would impact our ability to manage grow operations and would impact revenues earned from dismantling grow operations. Our community response team would go from 6 to 5 members. This is a clawback of 2009 gain. It would reduce our capacity for service in areas such as liaison with the Millardville Residents Association, partnerships with Fraser Health to deliver critical incident training, and partnership with the city bylaws to deliver SEPTED. Police labor costs are the largest portion of our budget and the key driver to most of other expenditures, support staff, cars, equipment, etc. Other options were considered, but if we cut somewhere else, the consequences were deemed to be more negative than cutting the police officers. For new requests, we have a net zero request, regular part-time records clerk, MNI clerk. This is a master name index clerk, and it's a component of our police records management system. The MNI contains persons, vehicles, and property information, and it is imperative that this information is accurate and to ensure the integrity of the system. The MNI cannot be left without maintenance, so we have an auxiliary staff correcting MNI entries since 2006 when the system was implemented. We would now like to create a regular part-time position to take full responsibility for the M&I entries, and we will be using existing auxiliary budget dollars for this. Revenue request is records processing fee, and a new fee for service is required to recoup municipal employees' costs for processing court-ordered requests. Agencies such as ICBC and law and engineering firms, government ministries, etc., are presenting the RCMP with court-ordered requests for police information. They would be charged for the time it takes to retrieve, vet, photocopy, and duplicate electronic data from from our police files. We have 3 new service maintenance budget requests. The first 2 requests are minor increases to our municipal staff, 1.4 positions. They are much needed increases in order to maintain existing workloads on the municipal side. First one is a tech support specialist. It's to increase resources in this area from 2.5 to 3 municipal staff. The 2.5 staff currently cannot keep up with the demands of the 430 systems users, resulting in overtime costs, frustration, and fatigue. We currently have the worst ratio of staff to users when compared to similar-sized detachments such as North Van, Langley, Richmond, and Maple Ridge. Port Coquitlam's share of this would be $7,400. The second is a clerk typist operations. This is to provide a second stenographer to support the 22 General Investigative Section. GIS investigates serious crimes and files, and as a result, their taped interviews with witnesses, victims, and suspects are in-depth and lengthy and take a great deal of time to transcribe. Crown Counsel will not proceed with charges if audio statements are not typed. These existing positions in this area constantly rely on overtime and other sections to assist with the high priority workload. If approved, the second steno would work Sunday through Thursday in order to catch up on the backlog, prepare for the busy Monday mornings, and reduce overtime costs. Port Coquitlam's share of this would be $14,500. Third servants maintenance request is IHIT. Coquitlam's share of IHIT for 2011 is $923,400. Because the city has a partial IHIT budget of $140,000 in place, the city's 2011 IHIT costs are $783,400. We are requesting that Council continue this phased funding approach by approving another $140,000 towards IHIT costs in 2011. If this funding approach is continued, the IHIT services will fully be funded within approximately 6 years. New requests. The first 3 positions I'm going to discuss are imperative to our organization at this time. Before I get into an explanation, I want to remind Council that our requests for 6 resources is consistent with our 10-year resource plan, and we had hoped that the ICARS model would be ready for implementation by now, but though it's close, it isn't there yet. When complete, the model will be an improvement from over the Sol-Gen stats, as it will include local land use data, allow police and municipalities to assess how land use and development decisions are likely to impact demands for police services. Until then, our requests are consistent with our challenges, and for this year, we would like Council's continuing support for the existing 10-year resource plan to address the resourcing needs that I've identified. First one is 2 sex crimes investigators. There are reported 10,000 IP addresses in the province of British Columbia currently distributing child exploitation material. The RCMP's Behavioral Science Group reports that they are seeing proliferation of internet child exploitation investigations. And at the detachment level, we are seeing more and more of these types of investigations as well. These files present many challenges, including dealing responsible with the hazards for investigators related to workplace exposure to child exploitation images, developing and maintaining the capacity and expertise to investigate these files effectively, as they are both technical in nature as well as complex. They require preparation for judicial authorizations and support for sometimes international files, seizure and review of imagery, etc. The second is for one computer tech crimes investigator, and it ties into the first request in that we have had a significant increase in the need for this position at the detachment. The Provincial Tech Crimes Unit cannot handle the number of requests for forensic analysis of computers, data storage devices, and other internet-related evidence. Forensically sound techniques are required to extract, preserve evidence to support prosecutions, as well as remain current with continuously evolving technology. The Tech Crimes Unit will also support other investigations, such as our fraud unit. As mentioned at the start, these three positions are imperative. Third request is for 3 general investigators. These positions are required to backfill positions redeployed in the past year from the front line to maintain the crime reduction strategy. And finally, we reached a capital program. This is a transfer of $250,000 from our building maintenance reserve to provide security enhancements to the front counter to meet RCMP policy directives. A risk assessment is currently underway, and the results of this study will determine the level of enhancements that are needed at the front counter. Did I do it in 15 minutes or less?
Are you done?
I'm done.
All right, then we have a whole bunch of questions for you. We'll start with Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much, Chair. Number one, in here you have a reduction of 2 policemen. Totally, I could never support that. I mean, how can you, all of a sudden, the city's growing and you're cutting down your firemen, you're cutting down your police department for the safety for our people. I mean, there's just no way that I can support that. I know that it's brought up, but I don't think it should have even been brought up. But however, Port Coquitlam pays $2.747800 towards our police department. And is that for paying for the building? Is that paying for the land? Is it reduction in the budget? What is it?
The Port Coquitlam contribution is just their share of municipal labor and facility operating costs. So it's not their share of the police contract.
So it's a share for the labor and that type of deal.
Yes.
But they also paid a share for the
police contract
and the land, or just the building rather.
Just the
They
building.
paid their fair share, didn't they, some years ago?
Yeah.
Yes.
I know maybe Chief you can't answer, but certainly finance.
If John and I can deal with that, my understanding is that some time ago they paid a share of the building, not the land. I don't know, John, you've looked at that more detail.
That is correct. When the detachment was built, Coquitlam provided the land. Port Coquitlam did share in the cost of the building, and similarly, they do share in the operating costs of the building in terms of the police contract. So they share their proportion of the cost for the detachment based on population and a crime stats formula. There's two pieces that go into the calculation.
Thank you, Mr. Dwell.
They also-
Ms. McLeod, did you have something to add there? No, that's good. Okay, go ahead.
Also, the provincial traffic revenue is that it's 1.4 million. Does that come off the budget on top, or where does it go? How do you?
They come back to the city, and I believe they're put back into
It goes to the city, and what does the city do with it?
That revenue is included in the police budget, and it offsets the police cost that is paid by taxes.
So when you present your budget to the city, you also have included the 1.4 million in your presentation?
That's part of the revenues, yes.
Okay. Now,
It's right on the screen.
there's also, you had a 10% vacancy rate this year in your police department?
Actually, I think it's currently under 10, it's about 9.32.
Okay, so on your total budget, that's about over $2 million. What happens to that? Does that become a surplus?
Yeah, and the surplus generally goes back, and that's used to pay the current IHIT
So
bill.
it could be rolled into this year's 2011 budget. So instead of it being, say, 27 million, could be 25 million or something like that. Is that correct?
I don't think it'll be 2 million right now. I think it's projected about
Or does the
700,000.
city take the surplus and it got wings on it?
Mr. Steblin or Mr. Dumont?
Through the chair, there's about $1 million worth of unfunded integrated team costs, IHIT costs, and the other integrated teams. So the savings from the vacancies go to cover those costs. So there won't be a $2 million surplus from police this year. It'll be a much smaller number.
You're talking about IHIT.
Yes.
Well, pardon me. There's, you know what? We get a little mixed feelings in here. You have on IHIT, you're probably $600,000 short because we funded it twice, and yet there's a saving of about 2-point-some-odd million. So there's a discrepancy in there. I would like to know where the discrepancy goes. Where does it go?
Mr.
Is it
Dumont.
going to be part of the police budget, or is it going to be spent again?
I don't believe that there will be $2 million worth of turnover savings, but there's more than just IHIT in terms of integrated teams. I believe there's 5 integrated teams, and we did put $140,000 in the budget last year to start offsetting the cost of those integrated teams, but I believe there's still more than $1 million worth of unfunded integrated team costs within the police budget.
Okay. We'll
So
carry on
there
a
won't
little
be a
further.
$2 million surplus. It'll be a much smaller
I'm pretty
number.
good at figures. Maybe not good at a lot of other things, but as far as adding and subtracting, I'm very good at it, okay? Number one, $27 million budget, $28 million. Take 9% of it, it's $2.46 million. $2.6 million, so one is saying that it's not possible to have that kind of surplus. The chief says that he's 9% vacancy rate. 9% vacancy
I don't
is
think
vacant.
that's what it was. The chief was saying that that is going to be the surplus, and Mr. Dumont was explaining that part of it goes to IHIT, part of it goes to some other integrated, and there's another portion. Is there going to be somewhat of a surplus that's rolled over to the city? I think that's Mr. Sikora's question.
Yes, typically we do end up with a surplus from police, but it's a much smaller number than $2 million. I believe in the order of $600,000 or $700,000.
Because it's part of the contract, not.
Well, but Mr. Chair, just a second, there's a 2.46 million. There's IHIT, let's say it's a total of $1 million. There's 1.46 million that's left over. And, to say that somehow it goes here and there and everywhere else, I'd like to see a budget
I'll
that
ask
is,
Ms.
everything
McLeod
is earmarked.
to draw up a one-pager on how that money is allocated after it's considered to be a surplus. And we can have that prior to next Tuesday's meeting.
Absolutely.
Okay?
And then you're asking for 6 new policemen, am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, on the 6 new policemen, you get $790,000. You sure, we said to you, here's 6 officers. You wouldn't want them all at once, would you?
Oh, we certainly try to.
Because you could not train them, They need a little training, a little adjusting to the city and a few other things.
Well, currently we have, and I'm not sure on the exact numbers, but we have a number of surplus positions that we've been maintaining. So we have more bodies than we have position numbers. The vacancy rate has been maintained because of long-term sick leave, paternity and maternity leaves.
See, before, if we gave you 6, you couldn't get any of them till after April when the provincial
I could
budget.
probably normalize 4 positions January 1st.
So let's say if the council members chose to give you 2, say, in May or June, 2 in September, 2 in October, or something like that, that would
Councilor
be...
Sikora, he said he could have,
Pardon?
he could put 4 people in those positions January 1st, is what the superintendent said.
I know that we could
4
put
people right
4
away.
people right now.
Yes.
But,
Yes, he
but he
said.
couldn't get them.
No, he
can't
said he
get them.
can.
No.
He said he can. But
Before the Victoria budget is down?
No, I wouldn't have the position numbers for them, but I have the bodies already.
Oh, you have the
I have a
position.
surplus of constables so I would be awaiting the position numbers before I could,
But would Victoria allow you to do that?
no, I
No,
would still
that's
have to wait for the letter.
Correct, okay, I'm through. Thank you.
Councillor Reid.
Oh, boy. I should just hit you. Loan me your gun. Okay. I just want to get a handle on this IHIT as well. So we have the 6 team that we've never funded, and we've always just funded out of reserve, or surplus, I should say. And so we've put in the 140,000. How many positions are unfunded? It's the 6 that we originally had, but isn't there more? There's a doggy squad, isn't there?
There's police service dogs and forensic identification services.
Right.
And IHIT and ICURS.
So do we have, can we get, not today, can we get a little breakdown of what it is that's unfunded, so to speak? Is that fair? Sheena?
Yep.
Thank you very much. When you do the G8 and G20, and I think I've asked this before of your predecessors, but we do not get any rebates on officers that we send there, correct, for their time?
Well, for the Olympics, we did get their salary dollars were covered, so we didn't. It was running like a vacancy in that they moved over to the Olympics, and those salary dollars that would have been expended by the city were actually returned back to them. So it's kind of a net zero thing.
But do we get credit for that?
Financially?
Yeah.
No, but there's no. It didn't cost the budget. It didn't impact the budget while they were away.
Okay. In any event, when we take officers now, I think we've got to a point where I'm thinking our funding is really unfair in what we get support from senior levels of government, which is not for your comment, but I think we've got to take this into the equation when we're dealing with our police contracts, that if they're going to be taking officers that we're paying for and budgeting off for, 10, 20 days, all total with 3 or 4 officers, that we need to be compensated for that. Also training. I am not excited that if we get 6 new officers that we're not going to get 6 brand new rookies, shiny face, wonderful little young men and women. But what concerns me is that we seem to be getting more of them than anyone else.
Well, I don't think that's completely accurate, because I know even in the municipal forces, they are in the same position as we are. The baby boomers are retiring. These positions come vacant, so they're having to go after new police officers. And same thing with other detachments. There's a finite number of experienced police officers to go around.
I know, but Claude, my problem is if I bring in a whole bunch of new rookies, then the seasoned people that I want out on the streets aren't. They have to be in the classroom, so to speak. And that's, I'm just saying I don't like the idea that we're getting more than our share of first-time police officers. So that's about it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. One is about sort of this notion of cybercrime and the internet and certainly child exploitation. How do you determine which municipality brings forward which resources? Because this is about superhighway. This is not about municipalities. And
that's a difficult issue. So that's the need for having that expertise in the technical field. We have all these IP addresses throughout the province of British Columbia, and I'm not 100% sure how it works, but bottom line is through some part of an investigation that behavioral sciences has conducted, we either have a victim in our area or a suspect in our area, and so these files are passed on to us to follow up on it and to work on. Again, lots of international connections. It's pretty complicated stuff.
So this isn't the kind of thing that's going to go more like to IHIT, where it's an integrated team that's sort of funded separately, or is it each municipality will just have their own resources and
Currently, we have a behavioral science group, integrated child exploitation team, and they had been taking on most of these files. The problem is there's been such an increase in them, they can't manage them all. So they've been going to the jurisdictional police where they can identify one and saying, you need to take this on.
Okay.
So we've been getting those ones. So the unit exists, but again, anytime you top that up, we're looking at an integrated unit and the cost related to it.
So clearly it just needs more resources wherever it can, and
Absolutely.
got it. Okay, thank you. The next question is actually more for financial services. It has to do with the IHIT funding that we've been doing traditionally, and I do appreciate that it's been unfunded and using these vacancies to fill it. So once we catch up, let's say over 6 years, there will be extra money then because they don't fill these officers all at the same time. And so what would happen with those extra resources?
In the event that we did fund all of this, we still would likely have some level of vacancy in any given year. And if there is a surplus generated from any department, council policy says that that surplus would go into our infrastructure reserve for future capital.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilor Reamer.
Thank you. My question is around your 10-year plan and the number of new members that you would like to see, and where that gets us with respect to our cop to pop ratio.
Well, the 10-year plan was started in, I believe, 2005. Find that. So since 2005, there's been a total increase of 40 members. So, and that's Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam combined. Coquitlam provided 6 in 05, 7 in 06, 6 in 07, 2 in 08, 6 in 09, and of course last year was a status quo budget for a total of 27.
Okay, and how does that fare? How do we fare with respect to other municipalities in the Lower Mainland with respect to that ratio?
I think the last time I looked, we were sitting kind of just below. You have that? Oh, there it is. Okay. 1 to 1. 1 to 803, I think, is where we're at. Actually, the 2009 stats is 1 to 833, and that's it's fairly close to the bottom. It's comparative to the other areas.
And do you have any idea at the end of the 10 years if those were to be funded every year, where are we going to be?
Well, it depends on, I guess, a lot on the population increase. You're projecting significant growth in the northeast sector, but that's in the next 25 years. So, we would, six would have a fairly significant impact, and in 2 or 3 years it would be into the 700s.
Okay, very good, thank you.
I'm going to just jump in here. I have a couple of comments, and I appreciate your presentation. I find when we're asking you to suggest perhaps where there could be some reductions in your budget, I find it difficult to believe that the only areas that you could examine would be regular member positions, especially when you have a $27, $28 million budget. I think I raised this last time. For me personally, I'd find it would give you much more financial credibility to come forward with some other more viable options. I certainly I'm not in favor in reducing your budget. I certainly, as Councillor Sikora said, I think you already know that answer. And when you present that possible reduction would be reducing 2 members, you know that none of us are going to say yes to that. So it kind of already provides the answer to the question when we are asking for a viable alternative. So I would like to see perhaps other options considered.
And there were other options.
And you did reference them. You said there was other options that were not as palatable, and I would like to know what those are. And all I'm saying is, this is the same answer we got last year when I asked to have other options. You brought it again. Same thing this year too. And if it's the same recommendation when we're asking you to look at your budget to give us some idea, it's only $240,000 out of a $28 million budget. I think there's other options you could have presented, and so I'm sure we'll do the same kind of scenario next year, and I'd appreciate to have a different response. So I know there has been some more thought on it. That being said, I'm totally in support of the policing, and there's no way I want to see have less members. Certainly look very seriously at increasing. There's all sorts of things. Population ratios can be skewed. It can be the amount of caseloads. It can be the amount of geographical area covered. That goes on and on and on. I understand the difficulties in analyzing that, but for me personally, I just would like to have a different type of presentation on where there may be cost savings or alternatives, even though you can take me at my word, I have no intention of trying to reduce the police budget.
Well, I do have some in my speaking notes further discussion.
And again, I guess it'll be like last year when I'll get an email after the fact explaining things, and I don't want to do that again. I understand. I just would prefer to have a different presentation, so that a few more things have been considered. Councillor Asmussen.
Thank you, one question I have regarding, I would like to know the caseload.
We get Councillor Asmussen's mic on, please. It's on now.
Oh, sorry. What would be the caseload per officer in Coquitlam and comparative to the other detachments and municipal forces in the region?
Our caseload right now is at 56 on the 2009 provincial statistics, and as compared to the city of Delta is 40, New Westminster is 58, North Vancouver District is 49, Port Moody is 30, and then we have some fairly high ones in the RCMP in Surrey at 72. North Vancouver is 74. And that's based on their cop-to-pup ratio as well. And then...
Are these all just criminal cases? Are these...
Yeah, that would be based on criminal code charges, or cases.
Could you provide the breakdown of that information and a change for the last number of years between Coquitlam's caseloads and other municipalities' caseloads? Are we dropping a number of caseloads, increasing the number of caseloads per officer would be good to know as we're looking at the budget. I guess going on to Councillor Reid's question about deployment of members and how they are, whether it's the Olympics, but I also understand that we have deployment of members to other RCMP detachments due to certain crime or issues in the region there. And it would be good for council to know when those happen, what is the cost back to us, what's the level of disruption in our detachment in our cases and our files here. Does that have an effect on our caseloads and the completion of those caseloads? I'd like to have, you could bring that, you don't have to bring it now, at a later date. The last question I have, you've got the request for members and the request for staff. Do you have any priorities in which is more important for you? You came a couple of years ago recognizing that more staff would help free up more officers on the street. And as we look at our budget, it would be good to have you come back with us and look at that in a priority sitting as what's you would think is the technical, the staffing, or the members, and how that relates to importance in your view.
I think right now there's a couple of priority requests on both sides of the house, and as I said, with the sex crimes and the tech crimes positions on the regular member side. The other one is the technical position on the municipal side, just because of the workload, and the clerk typist is again. Those are both high risk areas. So
those are the higher priorities of these.
That's correct.
That's good to know. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sikora has just remembered one short question he'd like to ask you.
I've got about two questions to ask. Number one, your manpower is 148. or officer power, it's 148, and then you have some for Anmore and Belcara, about 3.
3 provincially funded.
Okay, now are they part of this 148?
No,
They're extra.
they're separate.
And we get paid from Victoria for that.
Yes, they're provincially funded.
Okay, now, we're paying 90% of the fees, and Ottawa pays the 10%. It's still the same, right?
Nothing's changed,
90-10?
yeah.
Okay, so that means that there's $1.8 million saving just on manpower or RCMP, because your contract just for the RCMP alone is $18,647,700. So that's $1.86 million that Ottawa gives to us. Where does that money go?
I don't think it comes to us. I mean,
Well, what do you mean you don't get it? Your contract is $18 million, and we pay 90%, and Ottawa gives us 10.
Councillor Sikora. Ms. McLeod.
Our bill is only the 90%, so that 18 million is the 90% number. We don't get billed for the extra 10%. That is charged directly to the federal government.
Our share is the 18.
Our share, so in other words, our police budget in here is more than 18 million.
Well,
If you built in the 10%.
we only budget for the portion that we have to pay, but if you look at each of the RCMP invoices, it shows the whole invoice for the number of police, and then it deducts off 10%, and we pay the net of 90.
Okay, so yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Superintendent Wilcock, thanks for coming in. Please do convey, on behalf of all council, our appreciation to you and your members.
Thanks, Councillor.
Next item, Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is the presentation from Coquitlam Fire Rescue. I'd like to invite Chief Tony Delmonico to come forward.
Good afternoon, Chief. Welcome.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you for having us. Do a couple of slides on there with a few pictures here and there to help illustrate, I guess, what we do. Not so much for council, because we understand you know full well what our role is in the community, but being as it's a public meeting. Well, my understanding is there's probably going to be a couple, but that's their prerogative of a public meeting. So
They're putting out fires.
So on the first slide, we have, I'd like to, I guess, illustrate a little bit what we do. On the left, you have one of our biggest fires we've ever had in the history of Coquitlam, and that's where we use 18 apparatus from various jurisdictions throughout the Lower Mainland. On the right's a good illustration of our training requirements.
Your backup has arrived, Chief.
And quite often, when there isn't a department to call, the call goes to the fire department, and we're the ones who attend. So we're quite varied in the type of rescue work that we perform, and with that comes an onerous training regimen that has to be followed in order to comply with all the regulations and standards. So, and the middle slide is it's a personal one. That's a new project that we entered into a couple of years ago, and we're providing a resource to the province, and it returns some money to us at the city here. Also pads the pockets of some of our first responders who attend there, because of course they're working long hours, up to 20-hour days in some cases, working for the province when the forest fires happen. So that's a picture of a subdivision that our sprinkler protection team was protecting, and the fire was moving its way down the mountain from that. Believe it or not, that's the middle of the day, so you can see what the smoky conditions are. So. Anyway. I won't bore you with this. Is a standard agenda. Next slide. This is a breakdown of our department. We have, of course, the administration with chief officers, 8 of them, and 4.6 administrative staff. We also have our communications division, which has 4 dedicated dispatchers and 1.1 relief, which is provided by our firefighters. We have a prevention division with a captain and also recently approved public education inspector. We have training and education on the right-hand side. I'll talk about that a little bit more. We have 1 position in there. And the largest portion of our budget and of our staffing is through suppression of the operations side. So 137 of those, and that's 109 firefighters, 24 captains, and 4 lieutenants. So here's a brief overview of what the administration does, and there's a lot more to it, but didn't want to add too much to the slide. But for the most part, it's as it says, the administration. and all that goes with it. And our division, like most, is involved with many new projects here in the city. And with that comes some specific challenges, whether it's the Evergreen Line and the tunnel that's going to be proposed there, or whether it's a new bridge that's coming in and it's got a 600-foot tower crane which we have to provide rescue to, which is a challenge that not too many fire departments have faced across North America. There is some specific challenges for us, so I think we've done very well with the staffing we have and with the expertise we have, because it's our people that are our strength. So, Communications Division, this one is something we're particularly proud of. A couple of years ago, we did everything by pen and paper. It's progressed tenfold since then. And if you've been to our communications center, which is in the process of being moved over to the new building in December, you'll see the leaps and bounds that we've increased the capability in there. And with that, what it does, it speeds up our response to the public. And also, by doing that, it helps our firefighters, because when they're arriving on scene, they're arriving there quicker. And hopefully, if it's a fire situation, they're able to put that fire out quickly, more quicker, because it hasn't progressed past the room of origin. As far as medical calls, which make up about 50% of our calls now, of course, every second counts when it comes to having a medical response. So. Next is Fire Prevention Division. This is probably the most onerous as far as regulation is concerned. We are required to complete inspections. We're one of the few departments that's keeping pace with the required regulation and keeping up with our inspections, and it's because of the great work of Assistant Chief Ogloff, who's here, and his staff. And they are keeping us hopefully safe from the liability side of things by not completing our inspections on time. Next one, fire suppression. We said before, we attend a variety of calls, and I think you'll see from the list there, especially in the second bullet, the type of different rescues we attend. And with those comes anywhere up to about 8 to 12 days of training for each discipline. So we've embarked on a new model in Coquitlam Fire, and we're trying where we can to have, rather than relying on special teams that we have to use overtime call-out for, where we can, we try to use our on-duty staff and train them up, utilizing our on-duty instructors and our training division. So it is a fairly onerous task, and with the design of the fire services in the Greater Vancouver area, each and every fire department is doing the exact same thing as us. They're trying to meet their obligations under the various regulations and standards. So it is a difficult task, but I think we've been doing a very good job of keeping ahead of it. Fire training. This is one area that I'd like to talk a little bit down the presentation a little bit. But basically, they look after not only that specialty training we talked about, but something that we've been working a lot on, and that's our officer training, both at the company officer level and also at our administrative officer level. We have a very large turnover of both levels of our officer ranks, and we're trying to do some succession planning. And with the money we received from council last year, it's gone a long way. And I think you'll see that our people are better prepared for the vacancies that we know are coming. As an example, we have one of our deputy chiefs leaving early next year, so we're already in the planning process for that, as we also have 3 additional chief officers leaving within the next 16 months. So again, we're planning for all that. So as far as our activity highlights, report went to you about the 2006 Community Fire Protection Plan. As you know, the city hired outside consultants, did an extensive review of our fire department and improvements that were required, came up with some 52 different recommendations. And from that, we've been working on those. The majority of those have either been implemented and completed or are in the process. As an example, working with the engineering division, there's a dry hydrant now at Lafarge Lake that will give us access during a major emergency if we happen to lose our water supply in the rest of the city, to be able to draft from that lake to assist with firefighting efforts. So our hope is to continue that process in other areas where there is water supplies for our department's use during an earthquake or other major disaster. So We've, like we said, talked about our dispatch. I'll get a little bit more on some of the details of what we've done down the road. We've also working with facilities or with the Maurice's division, extensively bringing in a new administration building. You'll hopefully get to see it in December completed. That should set us on a path for probably the next 30 years. I don't think we'll need any improvement. There's capacity built in there that as the city grows and as our department grows with it, we should be fine and won't require any additional administrative building space anyway. You'll see that we're working to convert over to electronic communications wherever we can. In the past, our department was built on fax and paper. We killed a lot of trees, unfortunately. So where we can, we've done a very good job setting up a departmental intranet, and almost all our communications is going that way. And I would think over the next year, year and a half, will probably almost be exclusively electronic. And that includes our dispatch component as well. So, and again, the last bullet there is advanced officer training. We have put extensive work into it. It doesn't come cheap. We have to hire outside consultants in order to do the odd bit of training. Some of it we can do ourselves, and we are providing that where we can. So. 2010 accomplishments. Like most years, it's fairly busy and it's ever increasing. You'll see I've got the stats there from 2009, but 2010 is not much different. We have increased since 2002. We did about 4,379 calls. You can see we're constantly increasing as our population increases. So does the demand for our services. Roughly speaking, for every 20,000 population, there's about 1,000 incidents are created. So where this will be relevant is I'll show you later in the slide when we get into comparisons with other cities. Our structure protection team was deployed provincially for about 28 days, mostly in the Williams Lake area this year. There's a very comprehensive program that we've been involved in, and we're one of the leaders in it. I'm proud to say that our forestry firefighters take a lead in the sprinkler protection unit, and we're working with the Fire Commissioner's office to improve the system of call-out and how it works, and again, we're one of the premier teams that they rely upon. Also got involved in structural collapse training through a grant with the provincial or the federal government, as well the federal government and the firefighters union helped sponsor a hazardous materials training program that we now have completed 94 of our first line firefighters and officers in. So with that allows us to implement a little bit different model of service, and you'll see our Austin Heights fire station now has our hazardous materials response equipment, and they're fully capable of handling most incidents. Doesn't mean we won't utilize our specialty team, but for the most part, on a 24/7 basis, we have the capability in-house to be able to respond to those types of incidents. Our Fire Prevention Division did 4,100 inspections, and our newly created Public Education Inspector, I'm sure you've seen the report that came forward to Council on that, has been making great strides in getting out to the public and talking about fire safety. Some of our challenges, most of them relate to the unique challenges that come with some of the major projects, as well as some of the demand for services in the Northeast and other areas as we increase our population base. We have 31 high-rises currently in the city, and I think we've got probably another 5 in the hopper and untold many more planned. And it is a real challenge for the fire service here in Coquitlam. Some of the examples talked about the 600-foot tower crane on the new bridge. Surrey's got one side, we've got the other side, but we are required to provide service to that crane if one of those crane operators was to have a medical problem. We're the ones that have to go up and bring them back down. So that water supply in the new bridge has been a real challenge, but with that we've been working with the province and the construction company on that and servicing that bridge. As well, like I said, there's a few other challenges. They pale in comparison to some of those other ones, though. But training, of course, we've got a good program going right now for our officers, as well as there's a new collective agreement needs to be negotiated. So. Our priorities, touched on briefly already, but maintaining our emergency service levels and our response times. As we get more calls, especially up in the Northeast, and with the new construction going on, we've already had to alter our response plan down in the United Boulevard corridor, given there's delays due to construction. So Every time we have those type of calls, it increases our response time to other areas in the city, so it is a challenge for us. As well, we've, with Council's blessing, we've embarked on a program where you okayed $40,000 to start with a design program for fire stations. We've had some preliminary discussions, but we've pushed it off to early next year, given we're trying to complete the other building right now. But we see that as a good start. I would like to talk a little bit more about the capital plan and the lack of funding that's in there for now, because if we don't start planning, we're 5 years out before we can start developing a new fire station in Northeast. And in my view, I think that's a little too far out to be able to service that sector of the community properly. We're working on our dispatch equipment and software improvements and developing redundancy into the system. We've had meetings with ECOM about that. Currently, our system backups all provided in the same building. If we were to have a problem at that building, we would end up with a lack of dispatch, which I'm sure you'd understand is key to our organization, and being able to push calls to our frontline apparatus are the most important aspect we have. So we have some recruit, hire, and training due to turnover. We've been working with the Human Resources Department, Ron Price, and our assigned HR advisor, Larissa Koch, and we've started a process. It's 5 to 6 months long in order to get some new firefighters due to retirements. We have, looks like a minimum 6, could be 8 retirements in the meantime, so we'll have to fill all those spots. Fire runs are training a little bit differently. We can't just add up 1 firefighter at a time. We could. There is cities around that do that, but it ties up your training division for that 8-week period or 6-week or 10-week period that you have for a training period. And consequently, that's all you end up doing all year long is training if you do it that way. So what we do here in Coquitlam is we'll run vacancies for a little bit. Our vacancies help pay for the overtime for any vacant positions, and then we'll hire a group of 8 is generally our best way of doing it. So it gives us a long story, but technical reasons, it's best to go with 8 in a crew. So as well, we're working, like I said, with New Westminster, and now it looks like Delta and potentially Richmond on a coordinated urban search and rescue program, medium duty. It will dovetail into the federal heavy USAR program. And the goal with that is to each participate and to assist each other. It's very similar to our mutual aid agreement, but this is with a specialty training, and it's 75% funded by the federal government as well, so that assists us when it comes to the money side of things. But I think it's a good program that if we were to have a large structural collapse in Coquitlam, we can draw on the other resources as long as they didn't have any at the same time. In other words, in an earthquake, I think New Westminster would probably be hit much more in depth than we would, given the age of their buildings and their construction style. So we'd probably fare a little bit better, and we'd probably be assisting them. But either way, it is possible to have collapsed buildings, isolated ones, and it's nice to have the resources to be a draw upon. So we have been meeting with the Office of the Fire Commissioner on this, and we're wondering about the possibility with them working together to do the same type of dispatch system that we do for sprinkler protection teams for forestry. We might be able to do the same thing with our urban search and rescue or medium duty urban search and rescue teams. Now the hard part, the budget. You can see by our budget total expenditures up to $19 million for next year. Very little revenue. We have a difficult time producing revenue given the type of occupation we have. We are trying where we can to bring in revenue. Again, forestry, you'll see that we've actually put a slide in there to demonstrate where we are trying to raise additional funds where we can. We are doing rentals in our training center where we can. So where we have the ability to, we're trying to increase our revenue side. So I think it's a good example there. You see what our labor costs are, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But it's not only our labor costs, but when you look at all our costing, it makes it very difficult for us to, and I go back to Councillor Lynch's request and previous one with the police on why we put forward job cuts as our way to save money. I guess that's one of our biggest challenges, is trying to find funding. roughly, we have over $600,000 that's uncommitted, or if you want to call it discretionary. So we're being asked to cut about $200,000, about 30% of that. So we have very limited capacity to be able to cut, unless it's in jobs. That's just a reality. We have probably 200 different line items. I guess we could try and squeeze $10 or $20 here and there, but we get nowhere near the $200,000. So the only way we have to cut that kind of funding is to cut positions. So I know it's probably not the answer you want, Councillor, but unfortunately that's the reality for fire service. I can't speak for any other division.
I don't think you have $7 million in civilian support staff though either. So it is a different situation.
But pardon me?
I don't think you have $7 million spent on civilian support staff either, so it is a different situation.
Okay. Okay, and the next one's a breakdown of where we spend our funds. And like you said, the majority of them are on the suppression side. As you know, we have 6 companies that we staff, and that's where the majority of our funding takes place. Revenues, you'll see we bring some in on the prevention side when the different type of inspection plans are paid for, or any type of revenue that way. Suppression side, we're actually starting to bring out a little bit more there. When you look at the reserve funding, that comes in from a reserve that was set up, and I'd have to look to Sheena for insistence on that one, but my understanding is it's set up approximately about 4 or 5 years ago, and in anticipation of exactly what we're doing here, where we've tied into a better communication system in a contractual agreement with ECOM, which is the premier service in British Columbia. Here's a slide again on our provincial assistance. Provincial assistance really started back in 2003 with Kelowna. And my understanding is our city responded to that like most did, and they were able to bill the province for not only the costs of all the expenses for the firefighters, but additional costs for the use of our vehicles, and that money went into the fleet reserve. And in discussions with Finance Division, that's the understanding too. Anytime we get a recovery in this, once we've paid our expenses, the additional funding will go into fleet reserve. As you know, we have some challenges there, and that's our hope, is to where we can try and offset some of those costs, because we understand that fire, of course, has some very expensive vehicles inside the fleet system, and where we can, we try to assist there. So the reductions, we really, like I said, don't have much capacity other than to propose cuts to staff when we're looking at $200,000. And we put forward two different suggestions for cutting costs. First one is the public educator inspector. It was improved in 2009. Not that we want to, but that was the last position hired. And given we just have a vacancy occur in our fire prevention division, this wouldn't impact. There would be no job loss. We wouldn't have to lay anybody off from it. So that's another concern we have, of course, is impact on our staff. As well, we propose that if we have to cut the 198, that we eliminate 2 positions. And the cost savings there would be a net of 106. The actual firefighters would be positions, again, are vacant right now, so we wouldn't have to lay anybody off. But what would happen is the actual cost for each position is much greater than that. But using our current vacancy rate, it was calculated this is what the net cost would be. It would be just over $106,000. We have some new requests, which are service maintenance requests. One is turnout gear. We're already funding that. It's a required piece of equipment for our firefighters. We don't have any choice, so we've just been funding it out of surplus and within our budget. So we're requesting the $24,000. To explain it briefly, our officers don't wear out their gear as quick as possible, as quick as the first line firefighters that are actually doing the majority of the work. Theirs are lasting anywhere from 3 to 5 years, maybe 7 tops, and our officers are about 10 years. We don't have enough money in the budget to replace all those, so we've been using any funding source we can within inside our budget to do it. The other one we're asking is the firefighter. It's a field trainer. You may remember back in 2007 when Engine 5 was approved, there was 18 positions that were funded. One of them was a field trainer, moved over, and the only thing we got funding for was the officer component of the 22%. So we currently have somebody in the training division, a captain, and we're not funding it. So that's why it came in as a service maintenance request. We're requesting the firefighter portion to be in the budget. Otherwise, again, we're taking it out of vacancies to have to fund it. So. Next two are a little bit different. I'd like to touch on the assistant fire chief training. This is a vital position for our department. I know when it came forward last year, we had a vacancy. What we're finding right now is our work hasn't diminished. If anything, each one of our chief officers is picking up a portion of the job. It's not very well coordinated. We're still doing the training. It's still happening. Each one of our officers is having to put in anywhere from 2 to 10 hours extra per week to have to do the training, but it's not very coordinated. Even myself, I'm involved for probably between 6 and 8 extra hours a week involved in training, and because his position's not there. I would like to point out that we're one of the few departments around that doesn't have a chief training officer. I can't think of one in the Lower Mainland, almost in British Columbia, that doesn't have a chief training officer. And, you know, are we doing a good job? I think we're doing a great job with what we have, but I think it's a vital position that needs to be funded, and that's why it's back on the table. And I know last year we talked about our funding challenges for the city, and we talked about taking it away for 1 year to help with the contribution. And I'm hopeful that we can somehow find the funds to be able to bring that position back and have it filled sometime early in the year. Then the next part is the 2006 Community Fire Protection Plan, asking for 5 firefighters. Each company, when you implement it, takes about 20 firefighters. I'm sure you know that from 2007 when you added Engine 5. And this is just the start of a 4-year program where we add 5 firefighters in each consecutive year. And the hope would be that in 2014 we'd have enough staff to be able to have a fully functioning 24/7 capable company in the Northeast. So that's the reason it came about this way. My understanding, that's the practice here. Again, I need to look to finance to assist me with that. But rather than trying to fund 20 operational firefighters in 1 year for approximately about a 2% hit on the budget taxes, that this is the preferred method of funding in that it hits small increments rather than all at once. So this one, I'll skip over. When we originally planned this, it wasn't going to be a public meeting. I don't think I need to have the gory details of that one. I can maybe do that separately sometime for council. So I would like to compare the budget of Coquitlam Fire with some of our neighboring municipalities. And I chose these as, I guess, as good comparisons. I think you could probably pick any fire department in British Columbia. I chose these ones because they're close by and they're very similar. I chose Port Moody and Port Coquitlam because of their proximity. The other ones because they're very similar in size. And you'll see the percentage of the budget that's dedicated to fire and rescue. I'm particularly challenged because I came from the one on the far left, and now I've come to the one that's over on the far right. So it's not easy when you're doing more with less, and that's exactly what we're having to do here in Coquitlam. The community I came from had a lot less incidents. They had a lot smaller population base, and consequently there was a greater share of the budget went to fire rescue. So you see some of the comparisons here, though. You'll see how other communities allocate more funding for their fire and rescue. And not to take away from any other division, I just would like to do a comparison for you to see how it works out with some of these other cities and how much money they spend on their fire departments as a percentage of total budget. And I go into the Richmond 2009 report, and they said basically 17 cents from every dollar goes into the fire department, where here we're just over 10 cents, or just over 10%. So here's the comparisons, and this is more on a functional level. tells you a little bit about how many companies we have here in the city. It also tells you population, their per capita spending, and as well as the types of companies they have. And there's a method to my madness. On the right, you'll see the types of companies they have. If you go down to Coquitlam, you'll see we have 5 engines and 1 ladder rescue. That's a combined truck where our firefighters either ride on the rescue or on the ladder. If they get a call for the rescue, which happens many, many times in this community because of the 2 highways, then we don't have a ladder in service. Does that concern me? It does. It's my biggest concern since I arrived here in the city of Coquitlam. We have 31 high-rises, as I said before. We have 5 more being built, and I don't know how many more planned, probably 30 or 40. And we don't have a full-time ladder company. So I'm working with the union. There is some very good discussions happening on long-range planning with them, and we've made some good progress. But the reality is, we're short companies, in my view. I understand how the city is growing, and I understand how we ended up with the makeup we have. But I think when you compare us to some of the other cities, and you look at population, which is what drives our incidents and drives the biggest portion of our budget, which is the emergency response, you can see that we have a fairly healthy population, and we also are looking at adding many more in the future, more so than any other city, given that we're identified as one of the high-growth cities. So I guess my biggest concern is the future. Are we doing a good job now? I think we are. I think we're doing a great job, and I think we've got some great people. But I am very concerned what's going to happen in the future, and the only way to deal with the future is to plan. And so when I look in what we planned, and my concern is, you see that fire rescue doesn't have a capital slide. There's a reason for that. We're not referenced in the 5-year capital plan. We have nothing put away. It's a challenge for us. All our equipment, and that comes out of our budget that we currently have. We have well over $1 million worth of small equipment in all our trucks. And that's all repaired and fixed and replaced out of the current budget we have. So it's very difficult. Other cities have set up, similar to a fleet reserve, they set up an equipment reserve. Well, as you know, we don't have that here, so it's difficult on us. So just some of the challenges we have. But I think this is a good slide that goes to demonstrate, when we look at some of our neighboring communities, how many companies they have and where we're likely to be in the future as far as what we need to have. My understanding is we've identified over the next 30 years probably another 100,000 more people coming to the city of Coquitlam. If that's the case, then we're going to be equivalent to what Burnaby is population-wise. And you can see they're running with 14 companies. They're on 8 engines, 4 ladders, and 2 rescues. That's a pretty standard formula for most of Canada. Roughly speaking, for every just over 2 engines, you run a ladder company. Here in the city, in my view, that's one of the areas that we need to look at that. So, again, I think it's a very good comparison. It shows the amount of companies we have, and we're running pretty lean. Are we doing a good job? I can't say enough about our people. I think we're doing a great job. So to sum it up, I think we do have some challenges for the future, and I think the majority of them can be addressed through the planning process. And I'm hoping that our cooperation with the other areas of the city, I think, is doing well, and I think we'll be included in a lot of the planning. I think we have a good working relationship with all divisions, and we're hopeful that through the planning process we will address some of those concerns that may be outstanding. So, be pleased to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Chief. We'll start with Councillor Reid.
Thank you. It's obvious by your revenues we need to sell more calendars. Big, expensive calendars. Do we not have on the book somewhere another truck on its way? Why do I think that? Another ladder truck. I thought we did have one, but I'm directing this through to Sheena.
Ms. McLeod?
We do have a vehicle reserve, and our fire trucks are replaced on I think it's a 20-year cycle for most of them. Correct. And so there are some vehicles coming up. I think it's in a couple of years. I couldn't tell you what the format of the vehicle is. I'm sure the chief can do that, though.
Okay, because I know you came forward with that before, and I thought we had one of these big high ladder ones coming?
We do. We actually have 2 ladder trucks. One of them is, it's not the question of the vehicles, it's the staffing that goes with them.
Understand,
So-
but my question right now is, when you show me a slide like how many trucks they have, I want to have just as many trucks.
No question. We have the equipment side, but each one of those companies on the side there is staffed.
I understand.
Ours isn't so. But we do have 2 vehicles, and our oldest one is being replaced in, well, it's a discussion between us and Fleet, but about 2 to 3 years, so.
Okay. Because we need to house 20 more firefighters in the next 5 years, do we have space to house them at Town Center and Austin and disperse them around if we don't have something built in the Northeast within 5 years?
We do have the ability to utilize the other stations, that's correct.
We are hoping to have something built up there within 5 years, correct?
Correct.
If we don't, we can still house the whole darn shooting match, right?
We could, that's correct.
Okay. The dispatch equipment and software improvements, are we now into the process where you can drive up to a commercial building and they can punch a screen and know where all the equipment is in that building? I forget what you call the system, but we were working on that for many years.
Our MDTs, yeah, are installed in all our first-line apparatus.
Are they all
And
up?
our pre-incident plans are loaded on there, and I believe they're accessed by the crews when they arrive. So that system has been implemented. With the dispatch communication, there's about 5 or 6 different software programs we hope to implement in working with ECOM over the next about 14 months. And they should all be installed. The one that's probably the most promise for the taxpayer is what's called GPS dispatching. And what will happen is the computer model will actually pick up the closest vehicle and dispatch it. So if there happens to be somebody out in the road doing an inspection or doing some training and they're only blocks away, even though it's not their area or their zone, they will automatically be dispatched, and that'll help increase our response time. Decrease our response time.
When we respond on Highway 1 to an accident, we get reimbursed for that?
No, there's no reimbursement for responses.
Even on a provincial highway?
No.
And
No, there is upcountry. Some of the departments, the
That's
smaller
right.
departments, are able to access some funding from when they do actually do user auto education equipment. So.
We have made that request to the provincial government more than once.
we have done it, haven't we? Yeah. Okay, that's not very nice. Okay, so I've got trucks coming. The thing that I'm most upset about is the thing that I think is most important is the public education part of the fire department. And I think for children and for people going into the schools, for a firefighter to be doing those things is so important. And I see that's the one you put up on the chopping block.
I don't think it's because we want to. I think it's because it was the last position that we hired for 2 years ago, as you know. Our firefighters do some public education, so is it as good as what the inspector's doing? No, not close. I think you've seen the report and how much work she does, and I think it's a very valuable program, there's no question. But also, we also looked at the impact on staff, and because we have a vacancy in the Fire Prevention Division, that's one of the reasons why it came forward. It has less impact on our staff, so we don't have to lay anybody off because of it. So what would happen is that public educator would actually go back to an inspection role. The programs themselves would drop off. There's no question.
We have volunteer firefighters, don't we?
We have an auxiliary program. I think we're down to about 16 auxiliary firefighters right now, yes.
Okay. And my last question is, when there's a serious fire, like we had one last summer or the summer before, I guess, when I look at your layout here, so the fire chief, you're obviously there, but do all the people who are in prevention and training join the guys in the suppression team? So does everybody go out to a fire?
Almost all of our staff. Not all of the fire prevention staff would attend a fire scene. Some of them haven't received the training yet, but for the most part, almost every one of our staff will attend the training. Captain comes out, he assists. We have our fire prevention investigators out there at the same time. So we throw everybody at it that we can. In that last fire, I think we had, at one point, we had 50 firefighters in rehab alone.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we have the best call-out system of any fire service in the Greater Vancouver area. We call our closest firefighters to our needed point, which many of them go on based on seniority or some other form of call. We call our closest firefighters first for the obvious reason we need to get them there as quick as possible. So it's a very good system. Matter of fact, other departments have contacted us on how we do it and would like to model after ours. So.
Okay. Thank you for all you do. It's appreciated. Thank you.
Councillor Sikora?
Yeah, thank you. You have in your agenda here that to cut 2 firefighters. Well, I would not support that, as I said earlier. But even if it ever happened, you'd be spending that kind of money in overtime, would you not?
There comes a point, depending on how far up the ladder you start cutting, that you're actually paying more in overtime to replace a position.
Exactly.
What was calculated here is, roughly speaking, about a 40% overtime cost. So that's why it's a net of $106.20 instead of, it would have been $185,000 for 2 firefighters, 2 positions at first class with benefits. So you're right, we would be paying for about 40% of the time. We have to fill it with overtime, given we need to keep our staffing levels on our vehicles up.
So that one doesn't even make sense. But however, on equipment and the finance, the people probably answered this. We put in a program years ago that charged so much per hour or so much for use of equipment, and every 5 years that equipment was replaced, or you had enough money in that fund to replace. What is our equipment replacement fund right now at the City Hall?
Right now, our equipment replacement fund is between $5 and $6 million. I think it's about $5.5.
5 or 6 million?
Yeah, between 5 and 6 million.
That is very, very, very low.
Yes.
Compared to what we used to have. It's much low. I remember when it used to be up to 12 million. Look back on the records. It was 12 million, 8 million, 12 million. Never went much before under 7 million. Now we've got a lot more equipment and everything else, and we're down to 5 million. It's frightening. It's frightening. However.
Any more questions for the chief?
No, that's it.
No, I have one query myself. I thought I understood it, but the new request, the service maintenance request, you have a field trainer. That's the captain who's currently doing the training right now. Is that correct? That's the position?
That's correct.
So you've moved a person off the floor into the training position, and how are you backfilling that person that was taken from the floor, are you?
It's one of our complement from suppression, so if there's a vacancy there, then you have to, it's part of the global suppression staffing, if you want to call it. So probably about 30% of that time is being staffed with overtime to backfill it. So, but yeah, that's how my understanding, that's how it happened before. The position was transferred over from suppression over into training, and the only funding that's received is a 22% differential for the officer rank.
All right then, that's my only clarifying question, and I see no other questions, so thank you, Chief. And again, on behalf of the Council, please express our appreciation to your members and your officers.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's the last formal item on the agenda, and there are no further presentations scheduled.
Okay, if there's anything else around the table, seeing none, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?